Okay, so thank you very much. I think on behalf of the ADPC Board of Trustee and the Executive Director Hans Gutmann, I welcome you at the 4th Brandward Memorial Lecture. Just as a background, the Brandward Memorial Lecture is a series of lectures held to honor the memory of Colonel Brandward for his vision for safer Asia and the Pacific, and the outstanding personal dedication and commitment to the field of disaster risk reduction and climate resilience. Some of us in the room have met him and have worked with him, so we really know the value. And Colonel Brandward certainly was instrumental in setting up ADPC in 1986. And during his tenure between 1986 to 1992 as the director of the organization, when the center was at Asian Institute of Technology, he provided the vision, the insight, motivating all of us. And he worked especially encouraging the young professionals and seeking to enable government authorities to engage more productively in reducing possible disaster losses. He managed, taught, and traveled widely, conducting numerous disaster-related technical advisories and liaison with the governments and the non-government and the UN organization throughout Asia and Pacific. This particular 4th annual memorial lecture theme on innovation in climate adaptation and disaster resilience outlines the critical importance of disaster and climate innovation in reaching communities and people with meaningful improvement in the society, measuring the outcome and impact of ADPC's effort for a safer world. New technologies and the changes in the social fabric provide opportunities to do things in new and better way, and leveraging advanced technology and prioritizing a demand-driven approach to climate resilience. ADPC, through its World Bank project of climate adaptation and resilience, offering a new ground in using innovative approaches to help decision makers better respond to a changing climate. Before we formally begin the event, we would like to express our deepest sympathy and condolences to the families and communities affected by the recent earthquake in Turkey and Syria. Our hearts goes out to those who have lost their loved ones, the homes, and the communities. We pray for the swift and safe recovery of all those who have been injured and for the comfort of those who have been impacted by this disaster. We also thank our member countries, including Bangladesh, Cambodia, China, India, Nepal, Pakistan, Philippines, Sri Lanka, and Thailand for their support during the rescue operation and aid assistance in recovery and rehabilitation. On this, I would like to request you for a minute of silence in the memory of the earthquake victim in Turkey and Syria. And if you join me to just stand up for a minute, please. Just give me 1 second. Start. Stop. Thank you. To begin with, let me now invite my colleague and Executive Director Hans Gutmann for his welcoming remark. Hans.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, a very good evening and welcome to this Brian Ward lecture. Why do we want resilience? And resilience to what? And in fact, what is resilience? One dictionary definition puts it as the capacity to withstand and or to recover quickly from difficulties. It also mentions aspects of toughness, robustness, but also adaptation and recovery. The past 2 centuries, the 20th and 21st century, has seen unparalleled rapid change, which has led to prosperity, but also to destruction and uncertainty. Environmental degradation, political instability, economic instability, social instability, all lead to uncertainty. So resilience is often desired. For example, resilience to economic shocks. We can choose economic self-sufficiency instead of linked and trade dependency. We can have large savings and reserves instead of highly leveraged financing, and diverse engagement instead of specialized engagements. But this in itself has costs. Less efficiency, higher prices, less variety perhaps, etc. And whether these are acceptable costs is obviously a social issue and may vary between communities. What do we then mean by a resilient future? I think we need to visualize that future. We need to know what we want to be in 20 to 30 years from now. And these are, again, essentially socioeconomic choices. Education for all, an open economy, an open society, whether we have safety and security, clean and healthy environment or surroundings, etc., social safety net, and safety from disasters. Since the Asian Disaster Preparedness Center focuses on resilience in the context of disasters, the focus of today will be just on that. We want to minimize the impacts of disasters caused by different hazards. For example, hydrometeorological extreme events. We had the floods in Pakistan that we're still reeling from. And the previous year in Western Europe, which was overwhelmed by floods as well. Droughts. We can look at Central Asia in 2021, which was devastated by droughts. Storms, plentiful. Heat waves, India and Pakistan last year. Wildfires ravaging the United States in 2020, but also Southern Europe last year. And this is just mentioning some of the few hydrometeorological extreme events. And then we have seismic events, as we know, the earthquake last month in Turkey and Syria. Tsunamis, the one that springs to mind is perhaps that caused the Fukushima disasters in Japan in 2011. Volcanic eruptions, Indonesia has them all the time, unfortunately. Biological events have come up on the agenda much more. Of course, COVID-19 devastated many things around the world. But SARS before that, the bird flu is still coming up and down at times. Ebola is a concern. But there is others, locusts, which ravaged parts of Pakistan in 2019. Pests and diseases and other disasters that comes in after other disasters. So we have issues of cholera, typhoid, dysentery in the aftermath of floods, such as in Pakistan recently. And then technological disasters or events. Last month, in Ohio, in Texas, in the US, we had a toxic spill of proportion. Fukushima and others have been radioactive disasters, but we have digital disasters also. And I think the viruses, Mydoom and Novarg, was causing several $1 billion of damage. But I'd like to, in the little time I have, to hone down on pathways for climate resilience without reducing the tragic significance of recent earthquake in Turkey and Syria or the COVID-19 pandemic. Why? Well, because about 80%, depending on how you count it, of disasters in Asia and Pacific are weather and climate related. We need to know what we want to be resilient against. We need to know the enemy, so to say, the hazards, disasters are not acts of God or totally unpredictable. We put ourselves as humans in a place which is at risk. And we can also reduce that risk and prepare for disasters. It's humanly possible to do that. It's not just happening and there's nothing we can do about it, which is good. But we need also to know the tools, the approaches to resilience. These provide the pathway to resilience and for a fair and prosperous future for all. And the good thing is, much is known. Let's start with one. Take disaster risk assessment. If you don't know what hazards are facing you, if you don't know what they are, how can you avoid them and prepare for them? And disaster risk assessments are well established, but not used often enough, diligently enough, and perhaps not detailed enough. Time, money, effort, skills are needed to use these tools properly. Early warning. If we are made aware of an impending hazard, we can prepare for it. The technology is there now. The hydrometeorological hazards, the predictions are getting better and better. The lead time's getting longer. And so are the communication tools of being able to get the warning out, to get it to people. But what also often is lacking is a truly end-to-end early warning system. Globally, our monitoring systems are improving rapidly, and as I mentioned, telecommunication provides unparalleled ways of communicating early warnings, advisories, and directives. The UN calls for early warning for all. The World Meteorological Organization calls for nobody is surprised by a flood, or everybody is prepared for a drought. And FAO has its early warning, early action. But there are still weaknesses in the early warning, especially when it comes with the communication and translation of the early warning to actionable information at the local level. That is what matters. Disasters are local, so we need to focus on that. Turning to investment in disaster risk reduction, investment in DRR. But this needs money, it needs time, it needs effort and will, particularly political will. We are still creating more disaster risk than we are reducing. Investments in risk reduction apparently has an average return on investment in the order of 7, according to the EU and the World Bank. And investment in DRR must not be seen as a cost. It is an investment and it generates future revenues like other investments by reducing the money needed for response, recovery, rehabilitation, and rebuilding. We can calculate it. For example, according to the World Bank again, in Tabasco, in Mexico in 2007, a big flood caused damages equal to about 15% of the province's GDP, or $3 billion. And that started a disaster risk reduction investment program to combat the floods. 2010, it was struck again by an even bigger flood. And this time, the damage was only 1% of GDP. And it actually then could be seen as freeing up $2.4 billion that could be invested in other parts of the economy, social development, instead of having to go towards recovery and rehabilitation. So I see a future where projects, investment projects, require not just that the benefits are identified and the return on investment is calculated. Social and economic impact assessments are requirements these days, but we need a disaster risk reduction benefit assessed, whether they are social, financial, and environmental. And we have other fiscal tools that can assist us in this work. Turning to something else, effective preparedness and response to disasters. There will always be residual disaster risk. And to minimize the impacts, an effective preparedness and response is needed. For example, the flooding in Germany, Belgium, and Netherlands back in 2021 is an example of gaps in the preparedness. The Rhine River and the surrounding areas are probably one of the best early warning systems in the world. And the warnings were issued when the weather system came in over Western Europe and stalled over this area. But it was not readily understood and not clear to many what action they can take to protect themselves in the days before the floods came. Insurance is another area that is important for resilience building through preparedness, as economic capacity is one of the greatest denominators for resilience to disasters. If you have financial means, it usually means that you can cope better in disasters. Forecast-based financing provides money for this before the disaster. Index-based insurance enables low management costs for insurance payments, and the list goes on. So, wrapping up, what does the Asian Disaster Preparedness Center, or ADPC, do to promote these pathways of resilience? For those who don't know us, maybe most of you do, we are an autonomous international organization, as mentioned, established in 1986. And our focus is to reduce the impact of disasters on countries and communities and promoting sustainable development. We are headquartered here in Bangkok, but have offices and representation in other places across Asia and the Pacific, which is our remit for work, Asia and the Pacific. Well, ADPC is taking a three-way approach to support these pathways to resilience and making a more resilient future for all. Firstly, impact. ADPC is promoting the scaling up and scaling out of tried and tested approaches, tools, policy, regulations, and incentives. For example, in Bangladesh, we've been working engaged with over 30, maybe 40 fire stations, trained over 2,500 of these urban volunteers in light search and rescue, which are enhancing and augmenting the firefighters' work in response to disasters. Enhancement of the Mekong River Commission Secretariat's flood warning from 5 days to 14 days, or 7 days to 14 days, is potentially benefiting a lot of people in the lower Mekong Basin. We want to do more in these areas where we have skills and knowledge and ensure better preparedness for floods, practical advisories for drought, with support from government services and or private sector, business continuation planning, and I can go on. The second one, influence. ADPC is actively engaging in meetings, fora, and committees and working groups to help shape the discourse on disaster and prioritization and development of disaster risk reduction and climate resilience and improved preparedness. We work closely with UNDRR for the Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, most recently held in Australia. And we also link this event to ADPC's own permanent platform called the Regional Consultative Committee. We also have a participation in numerous UN groups and others, such as the International Telecommunication Union, etc., and work on non-economic losses, to name a few. And we believe that our experience from local action, subnational to national support, together with promotion of regional cooperation, places us in a good position to add value to these deliberations of these bodies, and will continue to advocate for greater investment in DRR, better preparedness, and improved resilience through practical examples and tested ideas. Finally, improvement. ADPC is promoting innovation to find new and better ways to address DRR and climate resilience and preparedness. But there is also a great need of capacity building. Tools are available, but not necessarily understood or used. Institutions and countries have personnel, but they lack knowledge, skill, experience, and connections. And decision makers may have knowledge, but not the understanding. For example, as the issue is with investment in disaster risk reduction. We test approaches, preparing our new ways of scaling up, scaling out, such as our work on urban resilience in Vietnam. And ADPC is actively promoting innovation through granting mechanisms and providing support to innovative ideas to be tested and piloted. And we aim to support successes of this to be scaled out and scaled up. And we promote gender equality in disaster risk reduction and inclusiveness in our approaches through tools and guiding practical applications for gender equality and rights-based approaches in disaster risk reduction and preparedness. So I hope with this short presentation, which I may have got slightly over time, I provide a little bit of a glimpse into what ADPC sees as some of the pathways towards resilience. And we are happy to engage with you on these and other aspects of disaster risk reduction. And I also hope that I provided a little bit of a startup for the more comprehensive lecture following. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Hans, for the insightful detail on ADPC and the pathway to resilience. Now it's my time to introduce our speaker, Tom Mitchell, but I should start by saying that as a friend of ADPC, until yesterday night, I didn't realize that way back before I joined ADPC, he was already supporting and helping and working with a number of my colleagues. Of course, Sani, our senior, is here. So it was like already a friend. But let me introduce formally. Tom Mitchell currently is the Executive Director of IIED UK, steering the overall direction and leadership of IIED staff, work programs, and partnership. He leads on public communication, strategy development, and implementation. He engages in public debate in key international events. He has a passion for finding innovative ways to unlock climate justice and is the author of the Climate Action Strategy Transformation in Time. He is a former coordinating lead author of the IPCC and the UN report, as well as has worked for the UN Special Representative Senior Advisor. So it's time for you, Tom, for the lecture. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. And look, thank you so much to Hans and to Aslam for inviting me. It's a considerable honor. Oh, brilliant, thank you. Considerable honor, of course, to be just the fourth to deliver the lecture. And also in, of course, memory of Colonel Ward, and I think particularly appreciating the work to build the capability of young leaders on the topic of disaster risk reduction. And I think it's also a great honor for me because you mentioned that there was a period of time in my career where I was supporting Margrethe Wallström. For those of you who remember Margrethe as the UN, I think, Assistant Secretary General for Special Representative for Disaster Risk Reduction. And Margrethe was one of the former people who gave this lecture. And I did a lot of work in the lead up to the Sendai framework with Margrethe and also with the UN strategy on DRR at the time. So really nice to be here and to take on some of that memory and legacy and big shoes to fill. I want to talk a little bit today, I think, about a topic that we don't so normally have talked about and addressed on disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation. And that's really about what an enormous opportunity it is for job creation, for economic growth, for seizing market opportunities, for understanding that the future is going to be about significant investment and spending from public and private on strengthening resilience. I don't think we have any other option. And so therefore, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how we seize that opportunity, direct it, maximize the benefits for people and for places of being able to harness new technology, new ideas, new approaches, and to treat it also as an economic growth strategy for places, including in this region. And with that also, I think, to address some of the more significant challenges we've faced, which is about financing gaps. It's about attracting private investment into a space that has been difficult to attract. And it's also about getting excitement among young people that there can be a significant career in disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation, and one in which money can be made, growth opportunities can be found, companies can be built, and so on. So let me touch on a few of these things today, and I'll promise not to labor and not to be overly lengthy, and there will hopefully be some time for questions afterwards. Okay. Okay. Move the slides on somehow. Give us 1 second. My pointer may be not working then, sorry. Or maybe I'm technically inept. We're talking about technological innovation and try on to the next one. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you. Okay, it was clearly me. So just a little bit of the sense here that I was highlighting about the need. So there's been estimates that between now and 2030, to meet the climate adaptation needs, we're talking about billions per year, where at the moment we know there is an enormous gap in that finance. So if you look at the UNEP Adaptation Gap Report, it talks about the very significant gap in finance for climate adaptation. And also the fact that actually the money is not getting where it needs to get to for a whole variety of reasons, but we could talk a lot more about that. But that's not the focus of today's lecture. And so the argument that I would make here is that we do need to find a way to be able to bring in private investment at scale to disaster risk reduction and to climate adaptation. And to date, what we've not really had is a formula to do that at scale. For different reasons, partly because people have talked about there not being business models, partly because we've not had the companies to focus on this, and partly because also the demand has been difficult to substantiate. But what about if we moved to a situation where there was an opportunity to seize that thriving economic opportunity around adaptation? And I'll talk a little bit about how we could achieve that. But just in terms of some of the barriers, so we've got issues that we know still around the finance flows that I've just highlighted. We've got a significant component of public sector engagement, where public sector has been really setting the agenda here. And I think a degree of nervousness often by the private sector that there can be unclear political leadership at times, or certainly that there can be political instability that means that the signals around climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction are not as significant, for example, as you get in the climate mitigation space, which has seen an awful lot of private investment flow in. But recently, and this was just before Davos, the World Economic Forum came out with a statement that says climate adaptation is a $2 trillion market opportunity. Bank of America assessment that was reflected there, and so doubling of that market opportunity within the next 5 years. PwC's recent assessment is saying that actually climate-focused startup investment, including around adaptation, has been growing over 3,000% in the last 6 years. And even research by my own organization at the time was highlighting a very significant growth pathway, and much more significant than in climate mitigation. So point being is that there is a market demand component here that is not yet successfully being met. What do we need though? What do we need to really strengthen those market systems? Well, certainly we need the innovations. We need the technologies, the opportunities to grow businesses and to deploy them at scale. But as Hans has already highlighted, we also need the skills, the knowledge, the capabilities. You do not grow businesses unless you have people who can take their entrepreneurial talent and a whole bunch of different skills in to be able to grow those businesses. And then we also, as well as, of course, the financial flows, we need the political signaling, the demand side to be really clear. Where are these technologies and opportunities going to be deployed and scaled? This is an entire market systems approach. And if we're going to develop this area well and in a targeted way, we need to take that market systems approach. What I will describe to date, though, is the fact that we've not yet got to that. What we've got to is a nurturing technology innovation model, which is about startups, and it's about granting, and it's about a scattergun approach. We need to be more directed, but nonetheless, it helps us to grow a bit of excitement. I think the other dimension here on the demand side is that we're going to need innovations in a whole bunch of different areas. This is not just single silver bullet technologies, that there's going to be one company or one particular idea that solves all of our problems. This is going to need multiple different innovations deployed simultaneously, both in technology, but also in policy and innovative finance and so on. Hans has already outlined insurance and preparedness and many different dimensions of data and digital technologies. And therefore, we can actually start to compose portfolios of innovation to tackle multiple dimensions of a problem simultaneously and also do so in places and in countries. So far to date, we've often not done that. We've looked at individual projects or individual technologies and have hoped that they will work for us at a scale and often been a bit disappointed. So let me just highlight the landscape here. So just a few examples of the fact that the nurturing of innovations around climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction is starting to emerge. Over the last few years, there has been this slow build of different initiatives to help support that. Many of you represented in the room, I'm sure, have been aware or have financed some of those things or engaged in them. Certainly ADPC has played a very leading role with the iCare program. And this has been about partly creating the conditions for innovations in adaptation and disaster risk reduction to emerge and start to scale. As I highlighted, the problem yet is there's not been the market systems approach, and equally the financial layers have often been missing to be able to create that rapid scaling component. So work to do here. But just as a few examples of organizations involved, there's a WFP Innovation Challenge, UNDP had an adaptation investment marketplace. I think my old organization, Climate Kick, runs a big climate launchpad program in the region as well. And many others here. The other thing that's exciting, and then really within the last 3 or 4 years, massive growth in the number of private investment vehicles around adaptation and disaster risk reduction. This is just a small sample of what's emerging, literally a new one every few weeks at the moment, with an acknowledgement that there is a place for venture capital, for angel investors, for growth scale investors to support businesses in these areas. Many of these at the moment have come from the US and Europe, but I think there is certainly space in Asia. The Asia Climate Venture Philanthropy Network has been looking carefully at this. I know in Singapore there have been different vehicles starting to be developed. But the point is that there is now hundreds of millions, possibly billions, flowing into investment vehicles that are looking for investment opportunities, but also looking for returns. But it highlights that there is a radically changing landscape here where there is a need to seize that opportunity. Let me just talk a little bit briefly, and I'm going to get technical here just for a moment, about when we talk about innovations in disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation. What are we meaning? Now, this is admittedly focused on climate adaptation. It was a program developed by several different organizations, including the IDB in Latin America, where there was a need to categorize what we were meaning. So water, agriculture, supply chain work on healthcare, for example. This gives you something that was referred to as a taxonomy that helps to at least lay out a landscape of what we're meaning by innovations in this area. And you can see here the work that was done on the taxonomy for adaptation solutions to dig into more depth around this. But it has become one of those guiding lights where many of the investment firms that are looking at this area have used this taxonomy to at least disaggregate what a pure play climate adaptation investment fund approach would look like. I want to just go on to talk a little bit about what's probably the more exciting elements, which is, well, what are some of these innovations? And I've not got enough time to go through in depth here, but maybe we can share the slides for anybody who's interested, but I'll pick out a few, but you'll see I'll scroll through quite a bit. And this is a kind of a global sensing of some of the things that I've picked out, but there are many here. Some of the ones that are focused more in the Asia region, there are organizations that are bringing forward proprietary analytics platforms. So for example, if you're a city or you're a private sector company and you want climate data, you can get tailored services for a subscription basis. You've got organizations looking at using AI to do precision climate smart agriculture, which is a kind of a common business model now for this area. And then a lot of organizations, particularly post-pandemic, here's an example of one in Vietnam, doing work on smart warehousing to be able to get supply chains to work in areas when there's bit disruption. To Desalinator is quite a famous one that's been around for some time now. Essentially, it's water for desalinization technology using solar thermal that can be also off-grid. Harvesting drinking water from the air is now a company that has received one of the largest adaptation investments to date. Philippines company looking at smart kind of AI algorithms around managing water supply and water pressure within systems to reduce water need. There is a lot of work across Africa on cold storage, where the business model is that farmers can pay for very small amounts of money to essentially have community fridges that are run by solar panels. Lots of work on satellite data services, a lot of work on water management. One of the satellite data services that's really developing fast, and I'm sure some of you are aware of it, is to be able to spot groundwater sources with precision using a variety of different technologies, which of course is helping to manage drought conditions. A few more, lots of work on flood protection measures. Here's one that I know that ADPC was supporting called Slam Dam, which is essentially an inflatable dam structure that you can roll out in a very short period of time. Lots of work on parametric insurance services, and one also that ADPC has been supporting on AI for earthquake early warning. Maybe I'll quickly race through here. Another one that I think has been getting a lot of excitement is this a kind of version of a water retention polymer that you can put in the soil that manages drought conditions as well. Anyway, point being is that there are many, many hundreds of companies now that are entering this space, albeit with a fairly wide kind of global scope. From our research, India is a particularly strong source of innovations, in the Netherlands as well. We're famous for its work on flood technologies and so on. So you do get these kind of centers of innovation around the technology. So then what's the strategic development opportunity here? This is not just about SMEs and startups and entrepreneurs and investment flows. There is something here that is about an economic development strategy. Let me just lay out what I think that might be. So I think you'll all be very familiar with the idea of Silicon Valley or of innovation clusters. The point being is that you can create amplification effects by creating clusters, whether that's geographically concentrated clusters or whether that can now be digitally concentration. Where you can start to see startups and technologies build on each other. You can attract in talent, you can attract investment firms and so on. So we've got this model now of clusters that has become, since the 1960s, a fairly significant part of economic development strategies, particularly around innovation, of which there are clusters that can be identified in lots of different sectors all around the world. But we've never really had the idea on adaptation and DRR. Well, if there is a market opportunity, there is a lot of inflow of investment, there's a lot of companies coming through, then why not think about building sectors or parts of the economy on climate adaptation and DRR like we might have in other areas? Just we've not done it to date. So what would it look like? So just as a sense here that we've had this idea of building the support network for a set of climate adaptation and DRR innovation clusters to emerge. And it has been supported now through the Race to Resilience. Some of you may be aware that there was a UN initiative of the climate champions to build non-state actor support around the climate negotiations, where they endorsed 8 different big ideas that could change the world on climate resilience. One of them was this, around building innovation clusters for climate adaptation. The point being, you can also attract in large-scale private investment if you have this approach, and something that we're really going to need. So what does it then take to build clusters, or to nurture clusters is probably the right way, because there's no well-defined science here, but what you can highlight is a set of things that you might need to be able to do that. And so the key here being able, for example, to generate the new ideas, the solutions, support the companies, support inflow, but then the benefit being that there is job creation, there is the economic value creation, there's the ability to provide a kind of a growth pole that attracts people in. But it also doesn't have to be something that is about just the elites. What's been proved from some of the experience that we've had to date, that some of the most successful companies that have been emerging are from communities that have been suffering those problems. And so that you found that the first market then has been those communities where a need has been identified. And so here the watchword is locally owned, locally appropriate, locally led structures. And there are other parts of the world that are starting to seize on this. Let me just take you through a few. Unfortunately, what I'm not going to be able to highlight is many in this region at the moment. But here I'm partly saying as an offer to say, well, can we imagine what this could be for this region and what ADPC could do, for example, in advancing this? Just to pick out a few. So 2 in the US, 1 in Asheville that's attached to NOAA, for those of you who might know the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, I think I've got the acronym right, called the Collider. So uses a lot of data, for example, to support companies that can grow out of using that data. 1 also in the US in Norfolk, Virginia, particularly looking at managing coastal zone adaptation and companies built around that. And that just as a note here, that these tend to be supported and driven by intermediary organizations who are there to help build the cluster. They help put those characteristics in place. And so you need these innovation brokers, essentially. One interesting one that came out of COP26 was the Glasgow city region in the UK, which basically said it wanted to be a leader on transformative adaptation, but also an innovation pole. And now Glasgow is one of those regions where across Europe, it is highlighted as a real innovator in this area. Probably the most well-funded, developed approach to this to date is in Israel, where Israel has developed 6 clusters with a lot of support from the national government. Israel is often rated as the kind of top innovation economy in the world, one of which now is on living in deserts, essentially. And so they've developed this community in the south of Israel with a lot of startup communities now working to develop and export Israeli technology on living in deserts. And then the other, I think, significant development is that the Global Environment Facility, the GEF, in its new GEF 8 program, has climate adaptation innovation clusters and systemic approaches as one of its core areas of funding. So one of the first programs out of that is in Sierra Leone, where there is a multi-million program now to support the development of a climate adaptation innovation cluster in Sierra Leone. So point being, this is not just about the most advanced innovation economies in Israel. This is also about working in different parts of the world. I want to just then talk about what it means to develop a regional strategy for this. And so this does take the example from the EU. And so the EU has decided that by 2030, it wants to choose 5 big missions, like missions to the moon, where they draw a lot of parallels to the Apollo mission and say we need societal missions. And 5 societal missions are ones they've chosen. One of them is on ending cancer deaths by 2030. One of them is on ocean cleanup. One is on regenerating soil health. One is on 100 zero carbon cities. And one is on climate resilience. And so these are the 5 big missions of the EU. Now, the one on climate resilience is built around the idea of bringing multiple innovations to scale, but with a strong place-based demand-led logic. So it says, let's choose the 150 regions of the Europe that are on the front line of climate impact, and let's turn them into innovation hubs for transforming European society to climate resilience. An incredibly ambitious plan. They're putting about 2 billion euro behind the plan from the European Commission, but the plan to leverage you know the way these things work, plans to leverage many times that, and has developed a comprehensive architecture now to support those regions. And there are, I think, now over 300 or so regions that have signaled their intent. And here, just as an example, is one of the approaches that they want to take. This is the Glasgow case, which was one of the kind of stimulants of the overall strategy, is essentially to say, if we're going to transform this particular region, what are the multiple innovations that we're going to need to deploy simultaneously to be able to create that leap? This is not just about technology, it's also about many other dimensions, including citizen engagement and financial innovation. And then what starts to emerge from that is an opportunity for scale. And here the scale plays are important. It's not just about deploying a particular technology in one location. It's also about the potential to meet the needs in multiple locations and having the financial vehicles around them. And so something like the EIB, the European Investment Bank, now has climate adaptation investment windows to be able to create that scale. Now, I'm sure ADB would be doing something very similar, but that there can be a regional or country-focused development strategy built around this now. And I think the European Commission programme, although it has some significant flaws, don't quote me on this necessarily, it has some significant flaws, that there is a large-scale opportunity here, I think, for market deployment of adaptation and disaster risk reduction technologies. So, let me just very quickly highlight what one of the very live cases of this that I'm involved in is. It's in Tanzania. And Tanzania has been growing an innovation cluster in Arusha, for those of you who know Tanzania, in the north of Tanzania, and that we are now actively in cluster building mode in Tanzania. And you can just see some of the early signals of how many people are involved and so on. And the point being to try and mobilize these different dimensions and characteristics of cluster development. This is supported at the moment by Irish government assistance, but also working with a number of different private investors to be able to grow that. A big focus early on skills development and capability building of young business owners, but it works with already a fairly well-established accelerator structure. So what are some of the benefits here near the end, for those of you who are keen to kind of get in on questions? Well, there's been a lot of talk about the triple dividends of resilience. And I think here we need to reflect back on what those triple dividends can be. So I think if you can deploy multiple technologies, you can test and scale those and have a robust impact and monitoring framework, you can start to see that there actually is a resilience benefit. You're avoiding losses by doing that. So it's not just about making money and job creation, it's also about realizing resilience outcomes. Something also about the economic potential. Particularly post-COVID, many places are looking and searching for what is the next economic growth opportunity. Well, why not, if there's such a big market here, direct that national investment plan towards this area? And then, of course, I think a lot of wider co-benefits. For example, on research and innovation strategies, this is a region of the world that has had phenomenal universities. Asia Institute of Technology, of course, incredibly famous. Across the region, phenomenal talents. There's a possibility to direct it in this way that brings, of course, a lot wider benefits, including around innovation, around policy and legislation and so on, which is going to be important to be able to scale such technology. And then, so why not also consider a global level effort? You know, what is the ability to connect multiple different innovation clusters in this area, where each may be having a signature or a focus depending on the local challenges? Where actually the sharing of technology and technology transfer has been at the heart of many international processes. Also, the ability to cooperate on such cluster approaches. This is a common approach in healthcare, vaccine development and so on. Why not also apply it to this area? So based on research, a few of the things that you need to have in place if you're representing a government or a city here, what would it take? Well, some of the research, this comes from The Economist actually, some of the key success factors you can read in The Economist in more detail here. But then also we were looking specifically around adaptation needs. What would be some of the key things to have in place? And we did an assessment of a variety of different data sources and said, where might some of the more fertile ground be? And did pick out a whole bunch of different places around the world that had some of these characteristics. This is a report that we did for UNIDO. For those of you who know UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, who are now getting quite heavily involved in this area. They think there's a big opportunity and resources to be mobilized. I know equally UNDP and others are looking in this area too, UNICEF. I wouldn't read necessarily too much into the names. We've got a lot more analysis behind this and we can share more details on it. But that there is a landscape of opportunity here that is based partly around some of those ingredients already being in place. I'm going to close just by a little bit of an advert here. In Bangkok in May, my organization, IIED, is hosting the first face-to-face get-together of a practitioner network since the COVID pandemic, something now that has lasted in 17 different iterations, the Community-Based Adaptation Conference. And it would be an invitation to you, and I know we're already talking to ADPC about partnership here, to be involved. The reason I'm mentioning it particularly in this light is that the Community-Based Adaptation Conference is now very much moved towards supporting skills development and thinking about nurturing talent and young talent in this area in order to be able to see potential business leaders of the future or local government leaders of the future and so on. So this now is a significant skills building and talent nurturing opportunity. And so with that, I think I will close and offer to follow up with anybody who is keen to kind of learn a little bit more or to pursue these opportunities and to go a little bit deeper on what it might mean for particular locations of nurturing this type of market opportunity. And with that, thank you very much. And again, thank you for the invitation. Been delighted.
Thank you, Tom, and I'm sure that this certainly has generated excitement and also an opportunity to further interact with you. We certainly will share this presentation with the colleague. We have some time before we go for the light meal. So there are two ways to spend it. One is that sitting here, we have the wireless microphone. I offer question and answer sessions, and we do, or I just read out the closing remark. We go outside because I think it will take another 20 minutes for this particular road outside to be better for travel. So we spend that next 20 minutes outside interacting, because one of the feature of the Brian Ward lecture has been about interacting, mingling, talking to each other. That is why what you see here is a 50% ADPC staff and a 50% invited guests. So at least you have at least one pairing outside. So either way, I mean, I am more than happy to invite some questions or reflections. If not, then I will just read out the closing remark, but still request you to be with us. There's some light meal and food outside, and we talk. What could be the best? We go outside? Outside? Okay. Hans?
Yeah, it's open if somebody has a question.
Yeah.
If there is no question, then this presentation is crystal clear.
Okay, name, yeah, please.
Mr. Michel, thank you for your presentation. My name is Naeem from Faculty of Political Science, Thammasat University. Your presentation generates some excitement and also opportunity for students also at the university level. It's also raised some of my critical questions, my curiosity regarding of the, I see this as a technological transfer from many cluster of innovations. But I also wondering, how do we deal with the local acceptance of the technology and also local ownership of the technology? I think this issue would also raise the question that why we are quite lag behind in terms of regional innovation hub. So I'm curious and I want to hear your insight on this. Thank you.
Yeah. Shall I answer? Is this working okay? Yeah. So one of the characteristics of successful innovation economies is to be able to protect the intellectual property. And that often requires a significant, I suppose, investment and commitment to the legal skills that it takes to create the kind of patent structure, to be able to protect that technology and to be able to draw the benefits locally. Not every country has those kind of legal attributes at the moment, and it's an important factor. I think what we can do here, though, is to acknowledge that the experience to date has been that the companies that have often been formed here and created have come from very local experiences, that they are community rooted. They've not yet become the kind of big multinational ventures that have been spun off by, for example, bigger corporations providing that. So I think there is a window of opportunity here for being able to create something in the very early stages of that market development. And I know, you know, for those of you who are well versed in innovation theory, you know there's this S-curve approach to dissemination, and we're very much still in the kind of the bottom of the S. So there is an opportunity here to be able to establish those protections and to do that early. But there are, you know, organizations that are kind of globally recognized for being able to support countries in the protection of those innovations. And that would be the advice that I would give to any country wanting to advance this, would be to explore that early, develop that early, because quite honestly, the international technology transfer frameworks haven't really delivered for developing countries and for poor people. And so it's an important, I think, recognition that that is not going to be the way in which that's going to derive local benefits. We can talk afterwards as well.
Reflections and question. Okay, so one here and then other side, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, for the fantastic presentation. My name is Kosuke Terayan. I'm from IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature. We have an office here for the Asia region as well. And so my question is about when you were talking about the adaptation innovation clusters, you briefly touched on the need for the intermediaries' roles in that stage of proliferation of those clusters, and you also mentioned them as innovation brokers in a different term. And I wanted to learn a little deeper about that. From your perspective, for there to be a successful innovation cluster in a certain area, what kind of types of people do you imagine as these kinds of brokers? Thank you.
Excellent question. Should we take the others as well?
Yeah, I think we take the next one and then.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. My name is Onsaran Pom Manuamond. I'm a consultant on climate finance and sustainability to a few organizations, including the World Bank and Climate Bonds Initiative. And since I work for CBI, we are also working a lot on taxonomies, including the first green taxonomy for Thailand that will be launched shortly. And in your presentation, you mentioned adaptation taxonomy, which is, I think in itself is an innovative idea, is an innovative tool that would help propel more issuance of things like resilient bonds, which is still very uncommon in ASEAN. But on the other hand, as we all know, that adaptation solutions are quite localized and very context specific. So the idea of taxonomizing adaptations in a way that become standardized in a way that you could do with mitigation investment may be a challenge. So I guess I want to hear a bit more of your thought on what's the latest thinking on this idea of adaptation taxonomy. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me start with the intermediary organizations. So yes, if you look at the development of clusters in any area over time, the early stage cluster development has required an intermediary or a catalytic organization of some kind. Let me pick out one example that I know well. So Copenhagen or Denmark has become an innovation cluster for the wind technology industry. It's one of those success stories of the last 30 years. What that intermediary organization did at that particular element was to bring together public sector and private sector and actually say that we're going to create a cluster with investment in that. What the attributes of that entity was to be able to actually be trusted by public and private, to be an integrator of the interests of those, as well as to be able to have a theory for what it's going to take to be able to put those different market system components in place. So the people who've been behind that were very much innovation strategists. They were economic development specialists. They were financial. This is a really key part. I think it's also about getting the financial architecture in place to be able to support the scale up. One of the really key elements over time that has been shown to be crucial is to not let there be a gap in the scaling financial investment architecture. So here you need early stage grant support. You need the first investors, the Series A, B, C, and so on. The moment you have a gap in any ecosystem, it collapses because the startups can't find a route to scale. So many of the intermediary organizations have also focused quite a lot on the financial architecture. And so it's a multi-skilled organizations, but they're also ones that fundamentally need to be trusted and to be seen to have the kind of best interests of kind of country or community at heart. So some of the organizations that I highlighted here, you can have a look a little bit in detail at the way the Israelis have developed the desert tech community. There is a very smart group of guys mainly behind this who have been really looking to combine a whole series of attributes in Israel. So there's a very directed, often publicly driven approach to this. It's tending not to be driven by private sector alone. So yeah, can go into more detail on this, but you tend to need to find an organization that has got a multi-skilled team, but also can be trusted as an intermediary with that economic development direction. Yes, on the topic of the taxonomy. So I think it's a myth that all adaptation is local and it cannot be scaled. If you look at the assessments that were done around the Food Systems Summit last year, 2 years ago now, there was an identification that in many, many different environments, the same types of mix of activities and technologies was really helping. And so, yes, it maybe needs a degree of local appropriation, or it needs a cadre of local people to be able to manage, for example, upkeep or of maintenance and so on. Actually, in reality, I think there are many different adaptation technologies that are scalable across communities and across the world, because we have shared biomes, we have ecosystems and climate zones that are similar. So yes, that as with any technology, there may need to be some local adaptation, but I think there are scaling opportunities. And then the taxonomy, there's the EU Sustainable Finance Taxonomy that, as you know, is including aspects of adaptation as well. The ASAP taxonomy here was developed, as I highlighted, for Latin America. But I think there is an opportunity for standardization, and without that, I don't think you will see the other products start to emerge. And resilience bonds, there's not, it's a big area that people are talking about, but yeah, until we get I'm fully agreeing with you that the kind of codification of that is going to be required to build that market. So yeah, I think my key response would be lots more work required on this in different markets, but I would try and bust the myth that there isn't an opportunity for standardization. The other thing is that these rapidly emerging investment vehicles are tending to use a taxonomy to be able to offer a kind of pure play climate resilience position, because they think it's now an opportunity to raise money. It was tough for a while, but now all of a sudden there's a groundswell. So just as an example, Chanel, the fashion brand, put 25 million into the landscape, the landscape fund. The one that was being raised by the Lightsmith Group has just closed at 186 million, which has a whole variety of the big financial investment houses behind it, as well as some of the Nordic Development Fund and others. So it's a kind of a mix there, but Goldman Sachs are playing a role and so on. So I think it's a fast growing area, but it's going to require people like you and me to be able to create the signals. One area of real danger at the moment, I would highlight, is that the impact metrics that are being used to assess whether that money is going to the right things and actually not causing harm all over the place. Real mix, adaptation and DRR is poorly understood, I think poorly codified by them. And I think there's a potential to cause more harm than good at the moment unless we wrap our arms around this and start to create better standardization and benchmarking. So I think that's a big area for a focus. But I know some of the standards agencies are starting to really highlight this at the moment. Gold Standard, for example, is developing an adaptation standard for investment at the moment.
Thank you. Any more? If not, then maybe, Tom, if you allow a question from my colleague side to you, because we are often asked. One of the area of engagement for ADPC is to also ensure that gender and diversity in each aspect of our work. Currently, we engage at ADPC two types of innovation. One is social innovation. We have a big program called Asia Preparedness Program. And then, of course, we have this World Bank program through which we are actually doing a lot of the things on the climate adaptation. One of the questions actually generally being asked by, let's say, FCDO, World Bank, and many of our donors, that how you actually prepare that all your innovation ensures that the people who are often left behind, we talk about it more often that nobody should be left behind, but how these innovation benefits should be reached there, how this can be quantified, maybe even right-based, that people who are the beneficiaries should actually demand in return that the technology that you bring does not increase the risk and the vulnerability. Maybe any reflection?
Very tough area, very tough area. What I would observe is that if you look at the participation in innovation development around climate solutions more generally, it is incredibly male dominated. And here we're talking about 80, 90% of leadership around it is actually with men. And that's partly around the way in which the financial flows happen and the fact that often women are excluded from those financial flows, and there's a kind of men support men approach to this. But actually, there's also a poorer understanding of what it takes to support women's engagement in innovation development. And actually, the work that we've been doing previously on this, partly also supported by the Government of Ireland on women's entrepreneurship and innovation deployment, has been looking at all of those layers of barriers to be able to have leadership from women, also in terms of the actual deployment and upscaling as well, not just in terms of the CEOs and so on. And actually, we found that it's an incredibly complex tapestry of considerations. Of course, around care and childcare, around support around the financial components in particular, around access to services, legal services, access to markets as well can often be highly gendered. You often have got governance bodies, of course, that we know that are run by men, even though the women might be doing the work. So I'm not sure I'm coming up with many answers here. What I'm coming up with is that there is an enormous space of improvement. I think one area where we have been seeing some success is to really be able to celebrate and to develop and support women role models in this area. And so there is a big program on women's entrepreneurship around climate adaptation now, where it's about supporting and developing those CEOs, the women CEOs of those companies, to be able to support and understand what it's taken for them to get there, but also to be able to support them as role models. Now, the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network has a women's climate entrepreneurship, or had a women's climate entrepreneurship component to it, where there was a lot of angel investors looking to support companies on climate adaptation with women CEOs. And I did cut out some of the examples, but when I was with Climate Kick, we had a network of women CEOs who were leading those companies. But we started out of having 9% of companies, and we raised that only to 19%. So there's a long way to go on this. Does that mean we should shy away from it because it's tough? No, I think absolutely it means we need to work harder on understanding that. One last thing I'd say, and there is an intangible here, and it can be difficult to talk about, is often there is a difference between women need to feel sure that they have the skills. We see this in research, right? Women often don't go for jobs unless they meet all of the criteria. And they won't step into something without feeling reassured that they will get there. Whereas men often will take a punt, or they will take some risks in a way where they don't feel as if they may not meet multiple criteria, they may not feel confident, but that they're willing to take more risks. Now, it's one of those things where it can often be tough to talk about, but what does it mean to be able to create the equality framework around the support structures that acknowledges that there are often differences in mindset that have been based in a history of oppression, essentially. And so some of the component here, I don't think is just on simple measures. It's a really nuanced approach to tackling this problem. But it's not just in this area, it's across the board.
Thank you. I think if not, because for the last 5 years, the government of Sweden, the Norway, and the US government has been investing in ADPC to address this particular issue that, whatever you do in influencing policies and programs and application, make sure that you have an element of inclusiveness prominently. The gender aspect must come very prominently because of the need of the region. So that's why this particular question, and we are not shying away, we continue to invest our time and try to influence some of our sub-grantees that we are doing, that in your work, make sure that this is properly addressed. So thank you very much. And I think what I would now offer is the food outside, and we can interact. On behalf of, again, our colleague, I think, let me reiterate both the ADPC Board of Trustee, member representative here, our Regional Consultative Committee, the Executive Committee of ADPC, and all the staff member. Our deep gratitude and appreciation to you, Tom, as well as all the people who has come for your presence and gracing this occasion. And at the end, I also like to thank my ADPC colleagues for their hard work in preparing and delivering this event. With this, the program ends here. Thank you very much, and please enjoy the meal outside. Thank you very much.